Good morning and welcome to Rising. As always, we have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, joined at the desk by Kevin Walling.
Amber, good to be back with you. Just a light news day on this, 5 days out from Christmas on this Friday.
I know. Merry Christmas to everybody if we don't see you before then. But let's get right into the news. There's a lot to cover. The House is in chaos. Republicans' second crack at a funding deal failed in a House floor vote Thursday. Here's what Speaker Mike Johnson told reporters on Friday morning.
Is there going to be a different bill on the floor today?
Are you going to vote today? Yeah, we're expecting votes this morning, so y'all stay tuned. We got a plan.
You've reached a new agreement?
We'll see.
And everything still seems to be in flux right now, so let's revisit how we got here. The first bill that House Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled was 1,500 pages long, but Elon Musk and President-elect Donald Trump spearheaded an effort to crush it. The Plan B stopgap was cut down to 160 pages, but still included the $110 billion that would be used to aid farmers and disaster relief. A crucial difference with that bill, though, was the 2-year debt ceiling suspension. Hardline Republicans like Chip Roy of Texas and Thomas Massie of Kentucky were furious with Plan B. Let's listen.
We are going to increase the debt ceiling, not just $4 trillion, that's false. We have spent $4.7 trillion in additional debt in the last 19 months. We're going to increase the debt by $5 trillion. That's what's going to happen right here by Republicans, increasing the debt $5 trillion. And what are you doing in the same bill? $110 billion unpaid for. The entire body has been racking up debt for my entire life.
Massie took to X and wrote, "This isn't complicated. Separate the bills and vote on them individually." Radical, right? Individual bills for each issue.
President-elect Trump, on the other hand, advocated for getting rid or extending the debt ceiling. He said it didn't mean anything, quote, except psychologically. He also took some shots at Roy on Truth Social. Chip Roy is just another ambitious guy with no talent. By the way, how's Bob Good doing? I hope some talented challengers are getting ready in the great state of Texas to go after Chip in the primary. He won't have a chance. Democrats also criticized the bill, especially the fact that Republicans changed course after a full court press by Elon Musk and President-elect Trump. Here's Democrat House Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Maryland's Jamie Raskin.
The Musk-Johnson proposal is not serious. It's laughable. Extreme MAGA Republicans are driving us to a government shutdown.
Everybody agreed, and then it was blown up by Elon Musk, who apparently has become the fourth branch of government. Who is our leader, Hakeem Jeffries, supposed to negotiate with? Is it Mike Johnson? Is he the Speaker of the House? Or is it Donald Trump? Or is it Elon Musk? Or is it somebody else?
Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi also jumped in on the action. She wrote on Twitter, quote, "Elon Musk ordered his puppet president-elect and House Republicans to break the bipartisan agreement reached to keep government open. House Republicans are abdicating their responsibility to the American people and siding with billionaires and special interests. The last time the government shut down was in 2019 on then-President Trump's watch." So a lot of chaos. Obviously, news is breaking, minute by minute this morning, hoping for a deal to avert the shutdown, which goes into effect at midnight tonight, Amber.
Yeah, it's super classic. Let's just start with this, that Congress waits until the last minute.
They love a Christmas holiday.
Yes,
yeah.
They do, because of course it puts political pressure on everybody to vote for whatever the agreed upon massive spending bill is, and anyone who objects is the Grinch who stole Christmas
Exactly.
and furloughed all of these poor government employees over the holidays. So it's intentional. I mean, obviously, they know when the deadline is to get a spending deal reached, and they continually wait until the last couple of days. And Speaker Johnson unveils this 1,500-page bill and expects members to vote on it within 24 hours. Obviously, that's not enough time to actually read it.
And breaking his own, I think it's a 3-day rule for this kind of
exactly,
right, for
breaking
review.
his own rule and claiming that he had reached a deal. Well, a deal with whom? Only the Democrats, apparently, because you had all of these Republicans coming out and saying they felt completely betrayed by Speaker Johnson. So I don't think the problem here was Trump and Elon Musk, although they obviously did put pressure, with Trump being the leader of the Republican Party, on some of these people who were on the fence from voting for it. But the way Speaker Johnson handled this from the get was really the problem.
Well, I think to your point, he's navigating this tightrope, right? He needs to keep the government functioning. We've seen in the past any kind of government shutdowns usually hurt Republicans, although there isn't that long-term hit to them. We remember, the 35-day shutdown with then President Trump back in 2018 to 2019. And he also needs to try and keep his job going from the 118th Congress to the 119th Congress. So he's got this thread that he's got a needle. He knows he's going to have Republicans, especially these hardline Republicans, Freedom Caucus members, who will never vote for a CR. We saw 38 of them come out against this Plan B bill last night. So he needs Democrats in order to get this passed. It's also a Democrat-controlled Senate for the last couple of weeks here before January 3rd. So he is in this very tenuous position, not made any easier by Donald Trump and Elon Musk, certainly.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things here that are sticking points for various coalitions, which is that everybody seems to agree on the $110 billion in farm aid and disaster relief. That's fine. Thomas Massie and Chip Roy would prefer to have things like that in their own individual bills as opposed to part of a broader continuing resolution spending package, which I think is totally fair. But then you have Trump coming in and saying that he wants to continue the suspension of the debt ceiling, which is a no-go for those Freedom Caucus Republicans and Republicans who are concerned about increasing government spending. But I tend to fall on Trump's side on this one because one of the key things that he wants to do when he takes office, two key things. One is to extend the Trump tax cuts for the middle class.
From 2017.
Because they're only permanent for the corporations right now. And then the second thing is to carry out the mass deportation plans. Both of those things count towards government spending and the debt limit. The government accounting counts a tax cut as spending because you're bringing in less revenue. So if he were to extend those tax cuts, he would almost immediately be up against this debt ceiling where it currently sits. Of course, it's suspended right now, but if it were to go back into place, he'd be right up there. He wouldn't have any money left to start carrying out the mass deportations or do any of the
music to my ears.
Sure, but any of the other projects that he would want to do. And so his suggestion is, give me 2 years. The debt ceiling's been suspended since June of 2023. Why would you do it for Joe Biden but not for me so I can enact my policy agenda? And then we can, with the help of DOJ and all of these other congressional subcommittees, then we can work on eliminating spending in other areas. So there has to be a balance, is his argument.
Well, and the amazing thing is you've seen some Democrats amenable to that issue of, because the debt ceiling really doesn't, it's supposed to handcuff Congress and to spend within our means. It certainly hasn't done it. We're at $35 trillion.
Well, they just vote to increase it.
They just always vote to increase it. We have this showdown constantly. But you're seeing the reaction. The pushback isn't from Democrats; it's from Republicans.
Right.
We played obviously Chip Roy. No fan of the president. They have an interesting relationship going back years, and the real pushback is Republicans and Thomas Massie, who is consistent on debt issues and the fact that we're overspending. So we're seeing this Republican and the 119th Congress is even going to be closer in terms of numbers for the Republican caucus. They haven't even taken office yet, and we still can't get the basic functioning of government accomplished. And we're heading into the next 2 weeks. 40 million Americans are going to be traveling. There's questions about TSA. Obviously, you have mandatory government functions in place, but it's going to be a huge issue if troops, for example, aren't taking home their pay, which is part of this. Social Security checks will still go out, but you have, to your point early on, a lot of government employees furloughed, not having money coming in for Christmas, and it just seems like a disaster of the Republicans making.
Yeah, I mean, inevitably, it always gets blamed on the Republicans, and regardless of whether or not it's actually their fault, I think there's more of an argument in this case. But it seems to me like the obvious compromise here is do a skinny CR through March, give Trump sort of a clean slate heading into the first fiscal year of his presidency, continue the suspension of the debt limit so he can enact his policy agenda. And if you want to enact any other line item spending packages, then do them on an individual basis. Like I saw one of the really dishonest framings of this, which people love to do on both sides of the political aisle, is they will pull out one thing from the bill and say, if you vote against the 1,500-page bill, then you want to kill kids with cancer.
The 190 million earmarked for pediatric cancer research. Certainly.
Okay, if that's important to you, then pass it as an individual bill. It doesn't need to be a part of this massive spending boondoggle with all of this pork in it, because to say that that's what people are voting against when there's 1,400 other pages is incredibly misleading. So that would be my suggestion, though, is do a skinny CR.
And that's what some Republican senators, John Kennedy, others have floated already this morning, a 3-week, clean CR extension.
I guess that's Plan C.
Yeah, Plan C. We're going to be Plan D, E, F pretty soon. The interesting thing to me, and what I want your perspective as a Republican strategist and journalist, you had 38 Republican members vote against the bill, Plan B, that was backed and endorsed by the president-elect, Elon Musk. They were pushing their representatives on the Hill to enact that, and you had 38 defections. I wonder what that portends for the next 2-4 years of a chief, commander-in-chief Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is sort of their last hurrah because it's easier to vote against Trump before he's actually commander-in-chief. But we'll see. I mean, I'm curious about that too, because some of these people, like Nancy Mace, who's
all over the place,
on this.
She's my representative down in South Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, good Lord, she's like arguing with people on Twitter about whether or not she would sleep with them. It's bizarre, but
very bizarre.
But then you saw on the Senate side with people who were opposed to Pete Hegseth, like Joni Ernst, starting to come around as she gets that pressure put on her. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that those 38 holdouts are going to be as vocal against Trump when his term actually starts. But we'll see.
Buckle up. It's going to be an interesting...
It is. Classic Republican caucus. They can't agree on anything. All right. We have a lot more to cover here on Rising. Stick around after this. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis was removed from the Georgia election interference case against Donald Trump on Thursday. The court cited an appearance of impropriety as the reason for her disqualification. She filed a notice that she will appeal. This is referring to her romantic relationship with Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade, who she put on the case before he stepped down from his role in March. In a 2-1 ruling, the court said, quote, "This is the rare case in which disqualification is mandated and no other remedy will suffice to restore public confidence in the integrity of these proceedings."
The decision reverses an earlier ruling that Willis could stay on the case if Wade stepped aside. Trump told Fox News Digital Thursday the case is, quote, "entirely dead and has been a disgrace to justice and was started by the Biden DOJ as an attack on his political opponent, Donald Trump. There is no way such corrupt people can lead a case and then it gets taken over by somebody else," end quote. But the indictment against Trump was not dismissed, leaving the future of the case uncertain. Trump and 18 co-defendants were indicted in August of 2023 over alleged efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election in Georgia. Internet personality Andrea Junker weighed in, saying, quote, "The fact that I know more about Fani Willis and Nathan Wade's relationship than I do about the crimes committed by Ginny Thomas and Clarence Thomas shows exactly what is terribly wrong with today's political mainstream media."
But conservative academic Nick Floor commented, "Does the winning ever stop with real Donald Trump? Please, Mr. President, enough. I can't take any more. We keep winning. It's too much. Too much winning, Kevin."
Too much winning already, and he hasn't even taken office.
Unbelievable. Well, look, this was one of the, I think, more concerning cases for the president because there were some individuals who already pleaded guilty to some of the election interference or attempts to overturn the election. But Fani Willis just mucked the whole thing up by doing one of the stupidest things I've ever seen an attorney do, which was appoint her boyfriend to the case.
Everyone knew it in the county. That was the case.
Everyone knew that it was her boyfriend. And then she repeatedly lied about their relationship, claiming that it ended before he joined the office, which multiple witnesses testified to was not the case, and seemingly had no qualms about the fact that she was paying for these trips for these two with her salary that she was receiving.
There were cash reimbursements and all kinds of salacious things.
And her explanation for that when she was doing her deposition or her testimony in the case was, well, we keep cash around because of our history as, I guess, as Black people. It's like, okay, sure.
The Robert Menendez defense with gold bars and cash in his mouth.
Exactly.
Listen, I think to your point, I think this was one of the more concerning cases to Donald Trump. We all heard that tape, right, of him pressuring then Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger of Georgia to find me those 11,000 or so votes.
Although I think they did exclude that from evidence ultimately.
Yeah, but in terms of the court of public opinion,
sure,
though, right?
Sure.
That there were tapes, there was that kind of pressure campaign that was mounted. Certainly this is a big win for the former president. Now, he and his team tried to push for the case to be completely dismissed. That 3-judge ruling came down saying, though, that the case can go forward. Potentially another prosecutor could step in. But certainly with what the DOJ memo about, indicting a sitting president, the president, obviously the president-elect takes office in just a matter of a month now, and this case will likely go by the wayside. There is that factor, as you rightly point out. There were 18 co-defendants. Any number of them have already pled guilty to some of those charges. Some of them have faced different results because of that pleading, but certainly a win for the former president, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, and all of the criminal cases that he was facing have gone by the wayside, with Jack Smith being ruled ineligible to be the special prosecutor. He was supposedly unconstitutionally appointed, and then ended up wrapping up the J6 case after the election because of that DOJ memo that you mentioned about prosecuting a sitting president.
Exactly.
So the only two that have...
Along with the documents case, too.
Exactly. The classified documents case as well as the January 6th case. And so the only two cases that have rendered any sort of consequences, for lack of a better term, to the president-elect are civil cases. The fraud case in Manhattan, where he was accused of inflating his real estate assets to obtain loans, and then the E. Jean Carroll case, where a jury claimed that he had sexually abused her and defamed her by saying that he hadn't. So those are both monetary consequences. There's a potential
monetary
sentencing.
consequences.
Steep
Certainly,
hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. And then there was a sentencing for the fraud case that was delayed pretty significantly, and looks like will be inevitably delayed. Well, is inevitably delayed until after the president leaves office.
And is 83 at the time, I think.
Yeah, because what was interesting about that, I thought, is that they dismissed it without prejudice. So they did reserve the right to potentially sentence him after he leaves office.
When he's 83.
Right.
I
hope they don't do that.
We do know that he looks good in orange, so there is that element to that. But listen, this was the last criminal case that was set to go to trial, and certainly there was some hope on that. But again, I return to this original point that you made. Fani Willis, you had one job,
right?
Not to give this job to your boyfriend that everyone knew about. You took on this national mantle. I mean, she went on a media campaign about this issue, and it just totally backfired. And again, Trump is vindicated. We saw that with both of the impeachment hearings that went forward. Obviously, he was impeached by the House 2 times and then acquitted by the Senate. And he got a bump in terms of public opinion because of that acquittal. And I think you're seeing a similar dynamic play out coming out of Georgia.
And after that Mar-a-Lago raid with the classified documents case happened, he was a shoo-in for the Republican primary because people viewed it as lawfare against him.
And that ongoing trial over the summer that Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, others could not get any oxygen in that primary campaign because he was able to take on that mantle of, I'm this victim, I'm fighting for you, you're next, which resonated with a lot of Republican primary goers.
It did. One of the most interesting pieces of polling that came out of the election was that, yes, democracy was a top 5 issue, but not in the way that Democrats anticipated it would be.
That's very true.
You had a lot of Trump supporters say that democracy was a very important issue for them, and the difference was only like a 4-point swing in Democrats versus Republicans saying that democracy was their top issue, which indicated that, yes, the idea that there was lawfare being used against Trump and Republicans were concerned about them being next in line was something that was very important to them.
Yeah, and it resonated with a good number of voters, especially in that primary, which is how he's able to be successful, certainly.
All right, we're going to leave it there. We have a lot more topics to talk about on Rising right after this. The Wall Street Journal is out with a new bombshell report where they spoke to about 50 people or more involved in the Biden White House who say that Biden's mental capacity was diminished well before it was reported on in the press. This article is titled, How the White House Functioned with a Diminished Biden in Charge, and it's getting a lot of rounds on social media, and Kevin, White House spokesman Andrew Bates, responded to the piece.
He did. To quote Andrew Bates, White House spokesman, said that the president earned the most accomplished record of any modern commander-in-chief and rebuilt the middle class because of his attention to policy details that impact millions of lives. Bates, who rejected the notion that Biden has declined, added that the president has often solicited opinions from outside experts, which has informed his policy making. So certainly a Biden White House in the final days and weeks of this administration in response and defense mode over this report, as you rightly point out in the Wall Street Journal, Amber.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. I mean, this is putting on paper what was speculated for a long time. Even during the 2020 campaign, it was sort of a calling card of Trump and his allies to say that it was Basement Joe, staying in the basement, Sleepy Joe, right? That he had this poor physical and mental performance. But this was rejected as a conspiracy theory at the time. Now this Wall Street Journal article with, again, nearly 50 sources, including people as high as aides to cabinet members and senior level officials, saying actually as early as spring of 2021, they were canceling meetings on Biden's behalf because he had good days and bad days.
Which we all do from time to time. I know I'm guilty of having a bad day from sometimes. But listen, I think the debate was certainly so shocking over the summer in June. And, you know, I went back in preparation of that debate and watched the previous debates, to your point, from 2020. And you can clearly see a difference in Joe Biden, the candidate in 2020, who ran a great campaign, still, you know, got the most number of votes of any presidential candidate in history in that 2020 election, taking the fight to incumbent President Trump. But certainly there is obviously a difference that we've seen over the past several years with the president. Now, as Andrew Bates points out, you know, with that condition and that situation, he's still accomplished a great deal of many legislative priorities for this country and is handing a country in pretty good shape to the president-elect. We can debate about that in terms of the economic and things
debate.
like that. Yeah, but certainly, you know, this reporting on the record with the number of aides and former aides is really putting the Biden White House on its heels.
Yeah, and the problem with Andrew Bates' statement is even if you accept the premise that Biden had all of these legislative victories and he's handing off the country in great shape, which we obviously disagree on, how much of that, though, was actually Biden and how much of it was this senior staff surrounding him operating basically on autopilot, right? We don't really know how involved Biden actually was in all of those decisions now. And one of the most concerning parts of this report is that people were noticing his decline before the Afghanistan withdrawal, which was the precise moment in his presidency where his approval rating plummeted because it was seen as such an international disaster that this withdrawal was done on an accelerated timeline compared to the plans that Trump had in place for this, that they left behind massive amounts of military equipment that the Taliban was able to get their hands on, that they abandoned Bagram Air Base to use that for the withdrawal, instead going to Kabul airport, where 13 service members were ultimately killed by a suicide bomber, many of whom their families have not even heard from Joe Biden since the dignified transfer. So to think that we have had a country for the past 4 years where the president was maybe not even all there, who knows, 80% of the time, most people are going to look at that and say, who the hell's been running the country? And does this explain why things are in such chaos?
Well, I think, too, I mean, the presidency is obviously more than one person. And again, you look at the achievements of this administration, there's no question that the president was in the driver's seat for most of those decisions and achievements. It's also a matter of the people that you surround yourself with. You compare that to Donald Trump, who I think went through 4 national security advisors, any number of cabinet officials. And I think there's something to be said for the judge of character that Joe Biden has had and the way that he has functioned with a Congress in similar shape, right? We're going to talk about, you know, this looming shutdown with the Republicans. The fact that, you know, the government shut down for 35 days multiple times under a Donald Trump administration with Republicans in control of the House and the Senate, and you compare that to all of the massive bipartisan wins, you know, that Joe Biden delivered on infrastructure, guns, marriage, you know, chips and science, driving that train in those meetings with Republican senators. And a lot of the pushback from the administration was, okay, you're saying that he's diminished, but all these Republican senators, especially that have met with the president over these years have not come forward and said, I just met with him and he's drooling and not knowing where he is or who he is. I think that's fundamentally wrong. And I think this is kind of a gotcha moment coming out in the last couple of days of this administration. And again, as Andrew Bates, and as I would say as a former Biden surrogate, just look at the facts and what we've been able to accomplish.
There were other reports prior to this, though. There was a similar Wall Street Journal report earlier this year, I think immediately following the debate, as well as a report from Olivia Nuzzi. Both had Republicans on the record saying, including Kevin McCarthy, saying that they noticed some things about Joe Biden and didn't think that he was fully up to the task of being president. So this is certainly not the first time. And I think a larger problem with this story coming out now is, again, there was speculation about this well before that disastrous debate performance. And people were told they were conspiracy theorists and that Biden was fine and that we were just seizing on moments where he was stuttering or going off script a little bit. And then everyone saw with their own two eyes what the reality was. So I just don't think people are going to be super surprised by this. But the fact that members of the administration are only willing to talk now that he's leaving power is a problem for me, because in order to have some level of integrity, especially in serving the American people, right? You are a public servant if you're working in the administration, and to have potentially actively covered up the commander-in-chief's mental and physical decline, that's not okay to me.
Well, listen, I mean, we see the president's schedule. It's publicly released every single day. I think there's something to be said for the loyalty that Joe Biden embodies with his team. And there is certainly a level of protecting the commander-in-chief. I think part of it is also the comparison to Donald Trump that's super free-willing, that calls people up. That's a different tact from what we've seen from Joe Biden, who's a little bit more protected, to your point, Amber, and a little bit more insular. But again, you compare the results of the 4 years of the Donald Trump administration, now heading into the next 4 years of this administration, where he hasn't even taken office yet, and Republicans are, embroiled in chaos. I take the steady leadership of Joe Biden, even if he is somewhat declining, comparative to the chaos that we're seeing on the right. And again, we'll just compare. Hopefully, we're together 4 years from now at the end of the Trump administration, and can compare the results and the achievements of those 4 years compared to the Biden administration.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Just to read a few of the more specific stories from this report, some aides said that when they were with the president when he was traveling, they often stayed within earshot or eye distance and would repeat basic instructions to him, such as where to enter or exit a stage. They felt that this small group of aides was assisting him much more than they would other presidents. Even when Biden was vice president, he didn't require this constant hand-holding. Compared to Bill Clinton and Obama, much more of the direct sort of hand-holding. And we remember the leaks of the photos of the preparation sheets where it would say, it'd have a diagram on the piece of paper.
Which we've seen with Donald Trump too, questions to ask and things like that, and briefings and tape on the ground in terms of arrows or where to go. That's nothing new for advanced teams. But I think maybe we can get some level of an agreement that older men in their 70s, late 70s, probably shouldn't be commander-in-chief, at least for a second term.
Yeah, probably not. All right, we're going to leave it there. We've got more rising up after this. Stick around. Could we be on the brink of another pandemic? Well, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention confirmed Thursday the first severe human case of bird flu in the U.S. The first human case of bird flu was found in Louisiana and announced this week. The hospitalized patient had been in contact with sick and dead birds in backyard flocks on her property, typically not a good idea. The patient, a 65-year-old with underlying conditions, remains hospitalized.
This case is the first H5N1 bird flu in the country that has been linked to what is called backyard flock exposure. This prompted California Governor Gavin Newsom to declare a state of emergency over bird flu. The virus has been detected among 645 cattle herds in California. This is more cases than any other state. Newsom stated in his emergency announcement that the risk of contagion is low. The CDC also acknowledged that the risk of getting bird flu is still very low as well. No case of human-to-human contact has been detected so far. So at least some good news on that front, that it isn't being passed human to human. That was obviously the concern of COVID. But, obviously serious concerns. The California, state of emergency is never a good thing. And the first severe illness coming out of Louisiana, Amber.
Yeah, I think the good news is that you can probably start to avoid this by not playing with dead chickens.
You made that point
Right?
in the story.
Especially if you're
intro.
an older individual with comorbidities, typically best to stay away from that
Stay
sort of
away.
thing.
Yeah. You heard it here, Dr. Amber.
Yeah, Dr. Amber. Look, right now I don't have much concern about this. We'll see, obviously, what happens. But I'm always careful about these illnesses that come out, and we're like, oh my gosh, is this the next COVID? Is this the next pandemic? COVID was probably a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing.
Knock on wood.
Knock on wood.
Yep.
And I don't want to get people too spun up about something with, again, only one confirmed human case, which was easily avoidable.
With serious illness, there's been 61 human cases, like with pink eye or a cough or something like
Sure.
that. This was the only
one with serious.
where the patient was hospitalized. I think it's good advice, as you rightly point out, kind of like, my arm hurts, doctor. Well, stop, playing with your arm. This element of common sense needs to prevail. One of the dairy farmers in California, in a New York Times article, called this COVID for cows. We'll see if that's the case. We've obviously had mad cow before, we've had avian flu before, and the real concern, as I said at the outset, is that human to human. Once it makes that jump, but I think, coming out of the COVID pandemic, and I hope you're right, and I trust that you're right, that was, similar to what we saw with the Spanish flu, a once in a generation pandemic that we saw, that this is not the case. But it's never a bad idea to be prepared.
No, surely not. And I think if there were some things that we did learn from the COVID pandemic in responding to these illnesses, it's that you should have targeted protection of the elderly and people with multiple comorbidities rather than a blanket restriction on the entire American populace. You should make sure that you have PPE available in the United States as opposed to requiring China to send it to you, right? Reshore PPE manufacturing and also manufacturing of drugs and other things that you might need to treat people. And also, don't be afraid of therapeutics. Sometimes waiting for a vaccine, that's a process that takes a lot longer. And then in the case of the COVID vaccine, we know that it didn't stop people from getting it. It only reduced the risk of severe infection or death. So think creatively about how to help people who do get severe infection before that vaccine comes around. And I think those are maybe three things that we can sort of take away.
And overarching, just common sense, to your point. I
Sure.
think those all can be looped into that. I am hopeful. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of the data out there, full transparency, which is certainly important. That's not something that we had with COVID coming from China. So I have much more faith in a domestic issue that we're seeing, transparency, full information being disclosed. Talk about the number of dairy positive cattle and cows as part of this, that we have a much better handle on this than something that was coming from overseas that we didn't have a handle on, didn't have full transparency. We're still asking questions about the origins of that. We know the origins of this avian flu. We can test it, we can track it, and to your point, hopefully minimize it by targeted engagement.
Yeah, and that's a good point about the origins of COVID. I mean, this appears to be naturally occurring, whereas COVID...
And it's been in the past with avian flu. Is
Sure,
certainly,
H1N1 during the Obama administration. And COVID, most of the intelligence agencies now agree, did leak from that Wuhan lab and could have been the result of gain-of-function research funded by the U.S. Another lesson learned, hopefully.
We're sticking to the birds on this one.
Yeah, stop making bioweapons. But the point being that it's quite likely that COVID was able to spread as quickly and severely as it did because it wasn't a naturally occurring virus, because it maybe had been juiced up or something to that effect in a lab. So,
Because we didn't have those original strains either because of the lack of transparency from the CCP.
Yeah, we weren't allowed to go in and go into the lab. So we're going to keep an eye on the bird flu. If we have any other updates, we will let you know. But for now, don't play with dead birds. We have a lot more topics to talk about on Rising right after this. President-elect Donald Trump's campaign promise of mass deportation has amassed quite the buzz. In fact, it was one of his main campaign promises.
But a newly released report from the U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement shows that President Joe Biden actually carried out the highest level of deportation since 2014. ICE deported 271,000 immigrants last fiscal year, and around 32% of those were people with criminal histories. The report reveals former President Barack Obama deported around 400,000 in 1 year, but a large number of those were recent border crossers. Trump's deportation plans may face steeper challenges. Tom Homan, Trump's choice for border czar, spoke to CNN anchor Caitlin Collins this week. Collins asked Homan if there were any red lines he'd draw. Let's listen to that conversation.
But look, we're going to build detention facilities because, again, this is a massive deportation operation. Let me explain why it's a massive deportation operation. Millions of people enter this country illegally, claiming asylum. Secretary Mayorkas has said under oath numerous times, for those who don't qualify for asylum, they'd be immediately moved. Of course, he didn't do it, so we're going to do it. But people need to understand, the people come to the border to claim asylum. Based on immigration court data last decade, 9 out of 10, nearly 9 out of 10 people claim asylum will get an order removal. So when they lose that case, we'll give them the due process. They can make an asylum claim. We'll take them to a judge. But when a judge says they're leaving, they have to leave, because if we don't, like I said, then what the hell are we doing? Just shut down immigration court doesn't mean anything more, and take the border patrol off the border because there's no consequences.
Gallup data released over the summer showed that 47% of Americans supported deporting illegal immigrants back to their home countries, which is up 10% from 2019. Also, during Biden's tenure, there have been roughly 8.5 million border encounters nationwide, according to CBP data.
Some Democrats have said they would not abide by Trump's plan for mass deportations. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, for instance, said back in November that she wouldn't cooperate, and Denver Mayor Mike Johnson said he'd be willing to go to jail to stop these efforts. So with so many deportations already taking place, can the president-elect legally up the numbers? Amber, certainly this is, and we've talked about this with regards to the budget conversations, this is obviously one of the things that Donald Trump ran on, right? We've seen those numbers change over time in support of deportation. Now it's a question of whether he can actually get this done, as he has said, in the first 30 or 100 days of the next Congress.
Yeah, it won't be easy. It'll be expensive. There's probably going to be high-profile missteps throughout the process when you're trying to get rid of millions of people. Inevitably, there will be mistakes made. And there, of course, will be a lack of cooperation from some Democratic governors like Maura Healey and Gavin Newsom, where they will not allow state and local police forces to cooperate with immigration and customs enforcement. But looking at the numbers, I did a little bit of basic math on these deportation numbers from Joe Biden, because I do think it is a little bit misleading to say, oh, well, he's done a record number of deportations. Well, there was also a record number of illegal crossings, right? 8.5 million throughout his presidency. If you look at fiscal year 2024, which is the one that was cited here, carrying out 271,484 deportations. Well, that's out of 2.1 million illegal crossings, which puts it at a 12.9% deportation rate. If you compare that to fiscal year 2019 under Trump, I don't want to use 2020 because of the pandemic. I don't think that's a reasonable comparison. 267,000, so still only about 4,000 lower than Biden in 2024. 267,000 deportations out of 1.15 million illegal crossings. That's a 23.3% rate of deportation out of illegal crossings. So sure, there were more in terms of raw numbers, but compared to the overall number of people who came in illegally, really not that significant.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point in terms of the numbers when you compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges, especially with the laws in place with the pandemic. But I wonder what your take, Amber, is on the economic impacts of this mass deportation. We're obviously talking about the financial element of the raw cost, right? Tom Homan has said he needs 100,000 beds in deportation facilities, obviously more immigration judges to process these folks more quickly. But on the back end, you know, we know so many of these folks that are here without documentation are employed in this country, supporting this economy, powering this economy, taking a lot of jobs that, you know, Americans born here really don't want to do, you know, from lettuce pickers to produce to, obviously construction jobs and things like that. I wonder the economic impacts of this with a still fragile economy coming out of COVID?
Yeah, I think there's two main points here, and one of which is that a lot of these jobs are going to be automated in the near future, such as the farm jobs that you're talking about. But the second most important piece is that I don't think we should accept as a country paying people below market wages for work because they're undocumented and essentially taking advantage of their labor. These are jobs that Americans will do if they're given the right wages and the right benefits. They won't do them for maybe $5 an hour and be paid under the table, but they will do them for a real wage because they ultimately have to pay taxes, right? They have to contribute to the system. They have to give actual paperwork to these businesses. And it shouldn't just be a punishment of the illegal aliens who come in and in some cases do take American jobs, but the corporations should be penalized for that as well, right? They should have to pay some kind of fine. There should be E-Verify in place to prevent them from hiring illegal immigrants in the first place. And when you look at immigration data related to the workforce, the Center for Immigration Studies, which I would grant you is more of a right-leaning source,
Yep.
has done a breakdown of the percentage of illegal immigrants in different industries throughout the United States. And they found that both legal and illegal immigrants do not make up a majority of any industry, the workforce of any industry in the U.S. And I think it's a little bit of a misleading sentiment that we won't have people to pick produce if we don't have illegal immigrants here. If we pay people the right wage and don't use slave labor, essentially, then I think we will.
I mean, we're in agreement on that in terms
Yeah.
of these corporations taking advantage of this immigrant population, paying them under the table, sometimes in very dangerous situations, conditions, hardship pay, certainly under the table. But again, I do, we've got the lowest unemployment rate, thank you, Joe Biden, in 50 years, continuing on. I do wonder the effect of removing all of these folks from the workplace. Your point that there are Americans that are willing to take these jobs for a decent wage. That also then speaks to an inflationary element of that. If we are paying folks a living wage for produce picking in certain areas, then that is an inflationary element as well, because we are right now taking advantage of cheap labor with these migrant populations. And again, with the backdrop of a fragile economy, I just do wonder the economic ramifications of all this and the willingness of some Americans, as you say, that want to go work in a field for 12 hours in the sun. I don't necessarily see that willingness on a lot of Americans that are here legally and born here.
I will say one of the biggest problems with citing the low unemployment rate right now is that when you look at the breakdown of the jobs reports over the past couple of years from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you'll find that the jobs gained were all among foreign-born workers and that American-born workers actually lost jobs. In the last jobs report we looked at, it was something like 1 million jobs gained among foreign-born workers, 1 million lost among American-born workers. So we do have a situation where there are a lot of American citizens who are not able to find work because of the importation of foreign labor. So I think when you consider that factor, you wouldn't see as much of an inflationary effect as you're anticipating, although I think it's fair to say that some prices would probably go up. And outside of the financial and economic question, I think it's a question of values and of how we view our country. Do we view our country as just a big business where the goal is to always reduce the cost of goods and allow people access to cheap labor and products? Or do we view this as a place where we want Americans who pay into the system to have meaningful, gainful employment, to have some purpose in their life, to have good jobs, to be able to have the American dream? And maybe we're okay with paying a little bit more for some goods because we value that more highly than just having, a cheap iPhone.
You do have a lot of faith in the American consumer when those prices potentially will go up. We'll see if that happens, and of course, we'll see what the President-elect Trump is able to accomplish in these early days with a Congress that's even closer than what we're seeing right now in this 118th Congress.
Very true, and maybe you're right. Maybe they won't like the high prices as much if they come.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna cover more on rising. We have a lot more to talk about. Stick around. We'll be right back.
The Food and Drug Administration gave a fresh take on what it means to be, quote, healthy on Thursday, beating out Make America Healthy Again advocate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who could be joining the Trump administration in exactly 1 month. The FDA's new definition of healthy foods must contain food from one or more food groups, such as fruit, vegetables, grains, dairy, and protein. The rule also sets limits for added sugars, as well as sodium and saturated fat levels that depend on the type of product, according to the FDA. FDA Commissioner Robert Califf said in a statement, quote, "It's critical for the future of this country that food be a vehicle for wellness. Improving access to nutrition information is as important a public health effort the FDA can undertake to help people build healthy eating patterns." Trump's Health and Human Services Secretary pick, RFK Jr., has been a strong advocate for improving food quality and discouraging sugar and seed oils. Some of his proposals are getting pushback from some food and sugar lobbies, of course. Right before the presidential election, RFK Jr. took to X and wrote, quote, "The FDA's war on the public health is about to end." So certainly this has been a topic of conversation. RFK Jr. has built a career both in talking about vaccines, but then also too, something where I think you have a lot of Democrats in the past who have signaled a willingness that he is in the right when it comes to all the additives that we see in food coloring, dyes, processed foods, and there could be some level of agreement on that front, Amber.
Yeah, and he's talked about chemicals being used in crop production and things like that as well. And I think maybe the FDA might be trying to get out ahead of him a little bit with these new guidelines, trying to show that they're on the side of making America healthy again. Maybe some of them are trying to keep their jobs. We'll see. I'm not sure about this yet. I'd have to see, what foods exactly qualify. It seems kind of vague that it just has to contain something from one or more food groups, such as fruit, vegetables, grains, dairy, and protein. I mean, there's a lot of wiggle room within there.
There certainly is.
And the FDA has a notorious history of getting things wrong when it comes to nutrition, whether it was the huge no-fat fad of the 1990s, where things replaced fat with sugar and got a bunch of people addicted to high fructose corn syrup, or whether it was the food pyramid that you and I grew up on, where grains and bread and pasta were the building blocks of your diet, and fats and protein were all the way at the itty-bitty top of the triangle. Now it's basically an inversion of that that we understand is the most healthy way to eat.
Well, and certainly, I think, to your point, we've also seen a decline in the faith of these agencies because of that, and understandably so. I think, as more research comes out, as we grow older as a population, the FDA plays an incredibly important role in terms of drug safety, drug protections, but it is also interesting, to your point, to see the changing advice that we've seen just in our lifetime of nutrition and where things stand. I think we can all agree that, healthy foods are healthy foods, fruits and vegetables that are fresh, that are not processed. Are critically important about this. And I do think it is interesting, the timing, to your point, Amber, in advance of what we will likely see are some contentious hearings for that HHS pick RFK Jr. before the Senate Help Committee. Bernie Sanders is the incoming ranking member on that committee. I think Bill Cassidy is the incoming chair of that committee. But there will certainly be some fireworks. This will be a part of it. In addition to all of the other things that RFK has espoused over the years. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, the FDA and their dietary guidelines only recently, I think within the past 3 to 5 years, I mean, don't quote me on that, but it's fairly recent, definitely after 2010, that they started advising parents to introduce potential allergens to infants between the ages of 6 months and a year, because prior to that, it was believed that avoiding things like peanut butter, peanuts would prevent an allergen, but actually it reduced a child's immunity and led to a severe spike in peanut allergies. I think I've mentioned this book so many times on the show, but I love it. Dr. Marty McCary's new book, Blind Spots, highly recommend.
Who's now up for an appointment in the incoming Trump
Exactly.
I think is he FDA?
He is FDA.
Or NIH? Okay,
I think FDA.
Yeah,
and
right.
He wrote in his book about how this misguidance led to a 300%, if not more, increase in peanut allergies in children because parents were advised to not give them peanut butter. And it's something so obvious and simple, but I mean, to your point, when people hear these things over and over again and then they find out 5 years, 10 years down the line that it was completely opposite of what they should have been doing, that reduces trust in these institutions.
I feel like every other day I see a report that says drinking coffee extends your life, drinking red wine extends your life. And then the next day it's like another report saying don't drink any coffee.
Red wine's going to kill you.
Exactly right. So, again, having some sort of basis of fact, which is what we charge these agencies to be a part of, is critically important. And one of the reasons why I think we're going to see so much contention, and I said it in the intro, Amber, is the power of the sugar lobby, the beverage lobby that we've seen in the past.
And the farm lobby.
And the farm lobby.
With corn
Exactly
syrup.
right. And it will be interesting to see if RFK is indeed successful in his bid to become the next HHS secretary. To your point, Dr. Marty as well, with these views that run counter to industry in a lot of ways, the pressure campaign that we'll see in the lead up to those hearings, and then if they are successful, the pushback that we're going to see from industry, mass amounts of TV spending. Anytime you take on an industry like that, they're incredibly powerful. I wonder, Amber, to your point, how successful these folks will actually be.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be easy. I think one of the things that does help RFK is having these really well-respected doctors in sort of corollary cabinet positions, whether it's Dr. Marty McCary or Dr. Jay Bhattacharya.
Dr. Jeanette Neshwat, my buddy, who's going to be the next Surgeon General.
Yeah, I mean,
well.
She's getting a little bit of pushback due to some gender ideology stuff, but we'll see what happens with that. But nonetheless, obviously, those three, as well as some of the other appointments, I mean, even Dr. Oz, to an extent, prior to his TV time, had a well-established pedigree in serving as doctors. And
I mean, he was an ER, he has a number of patents and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I mean, people give him a hard time because of like the Oprah sort of timeline, but all four of those people have great educations, have great experience working as doctors in the medical field. There will be outside advisors, I'm sure, who have a lot of medical expertise that will help give some credibility for people who are concerned about RFK's maybe more fringe views that they don't necessarily subscribe to. If you have these doctors around him saying, no, actually, he's right on this issue, I think that will help string along some of the people who are skeptical.
Yeah, and it is interesting, and I would argue that Dr. Oz, I think, should be maybe at NIH or FDA or something like that, probably not running CMS.
I don't disagree with that.
But we'll see. But certainly Donald Trump likes to have camera-ready experts, well-versed in these subjects, to change and shift public policy. So we'll see how that process plays out.
We sure will, and here's to hoping that we can help make America healthier, because the obesity rates and chronic illness rates, I think we all can agree, are not good.
Just don't take my coffee.
Good deal. All right. We're going to have a lot more to cover here on Rising. Please stick around. We'll be back after the break. Well, what do you think about having Christmas in space? That's what's in store for Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, the pair of NASA astronauts who have been stuck in the International Space Station since June. They posed for a holiday photo that NASA posted with caption, "Another day, another sleigh," and almost immediately online users weighed in, expressing concern for 59-year-old Williams. She looks visibly more gaunt compared to when she took off for space, and her hair graying a bit there too. "Strange, Suni Williams does not look well. She needs to come home now," said one user. Another tweeted, "They look like they are in very bad shape, in need of being evacuated ASAP."
Williams and Wilmore were only supposed to be gone for a week or so, but a series of technical difficulties, including propulsion system issues, led to multiple delays. Though Boeing Starliner took them to the ISS, Elon Musk's SpaceX will return them to the Earth. NASA said Thursday the two will remain stranded until March. Christmas in space, sign me up, but not for 8 months at a time.
Yeah, I'm out. I have no interest in space. I don't want to go. Leave me here on the sweet green Earth. But so what is kind of interesting about this is, I guess SpaceX had made contact with them, but wasn't able to bring them home. They have to complete some kind of construction of a return vessel to get them back. So there is a plan to get them home. It's just that it's going to take longer than was originally believed to happen. I saw some people speculating that they weren't actually stuck in space because they had Santa hats. But again, my understanding is that people are able to go visit them. They just can't bring them home. I don't know. I don't understand it.
Or they've just, the ISS has been up there for 20 plus years. There's probably just, I
all
think there's
sorts
a
of
gorilla
things.
suit up there too. Remember when that astronaut dressed in the gorilla suit to surprise his comrades in the station? But certainly, obviously they probably didn't pack enough underwear. When you pack for a week-long trip and then you're there 8 to 10 months, stuff is certainly going to spoil. Again, these are two astronauts that are well-versed, that have been in space before, but certainly did not plan on this long of a journey. Amber, to your point, SpaceX is likely to rescue them after April of this year. It was a Boeing Starliner that originally brought them to the ISS. NASA had concerns about proportion issues with that rocket, which is what grounded it. It came back without that crew successfully, but there were certainly concerns of cost to human life. But certainly a long trip up there for them.
Yeah, and we're in a really weird space right now because of the way NASA has been operating, where they've been outsourcing a lot of their production, their development, and their creation of new technology to these private companies, one of which, SpaceX, has seemingly leaped ahead of the others in terms of its technological ability, and the way that Musk was recently able to catch a piece of a rocket, give it a
President-elect
big
loves
hug.
to talk about, which is
He
super
loves that
impressive,
story,
right?
but it is very cool.
Yeah.
But what does this say about our nation's funding of space exploration and the importance that we put on it if NASA is no longer funded to the point where they have to go to these private companies? It seems like 10, 20 years ago, there was a decision made that we were good with the level of space exploration we had completed. We weren't really going to go much further than that. Now you have people like Elon Musk talking about potentially sending humans to Mars,
Certainly,
of all places. I think it's a great thing to have people interested in space exploration. Again, I'm not interested in it. But when you have people with billions of dollars and this is something that they want to do, I think it's great for people to be creative, to be enterprising and entrepreneurial, and to help an area that's clearly very much lacking in the U.S. government.
Yeah, and this might be a small C conservative argument that I'm going to make as the Democrat on this panel, but I like the idea, to your point, of these corporations competing for government funding, right, as part of this effort, but also the ingenuity, the ability to advance these technologies when you have these different companies that once NASA filled that role, obviously with the space shuttle and the moon missions and things like that, and had a direct, and we saw competition obviously with the Soviets that spurred a lot of that engagement. We're seeing a similar dynamic with these corporations, to your point, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Boeing in the mix, not just competing for government dollars, but also competing in the technology race.
Right.
And I think that's a great thing for space exploration. I was a kid that loved the space program. I went to space camp as a kid. It was the best week of my life down in Florida at Cape Kennedy. And I think this is a great thing, obviously with government oversight, right? NASA flagged the issue with that system for Boeing, which is why those astronauts are there. But it is interesting to see kind of NASA take this backseat role while these corporations have moved forward.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be working better because the cost of failure for a government-funded agency is much higher than if it's someone investing their own dollars into trying to complete something for the sake of beating the other guy, or just having that sense of accomplishment with being able to achieve something so great. It feels like we're sort of in the early days of pioneering America, where people were very entrepreneurial. They wanted to create things, they wanted to achieve, and it's not just another like financial services firm. It feels like so many new companies these days are based in the digital world, and to have something where people like Musk and Bezos are actually creating something, a physical product that can do amazing, great things beyond even the human imagination, is a really special thing to witness.
And to your point, assuming the risk in that as well, where we've had issues, obviously technical issues with the space program where we've lost astronauts and things like that, which are horrible tragedies. But the element of ingenuity coming from the private sector, assuming those risks, because we've seen a lot of rockets explode on the launch pad, in the past with some of these corporations, which is, again, one of the reasons why these astronauts are stuck up there for nearly a year. I do think it's a brave new world that we're embarking on. From your point, from the Wright brothers who started this in their Dayton bike shop to Kitty Hawk to now these corporations and these corporate leaders, really, in Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, stepping up because of their interest in what's next for space exploration and for the human experiment.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I mean, Kai Trump, the president's granddaughter, has started a YouTube channel. She posted a behind-the-scenes video of them watching that rocket catch at the SpaceX headquarters. And it was really interesting to hear Musk talk about it to the president-elect and some of the other people who were there, because he kept saying, I'm pretty sure it's going to fail. I'm pretty sure it's going to explode, or I'm pretty sure it's not going to work. And then it eventually did. But his acceptance of the fact that it was probably going to fail and that was okay because he would learn something from it.
That's all part of it. Yeah, exactly.
That's nice to hear that attitude. I don't think we hear it enough these days.
True. Well, we send our best wishes to those astronauts Williams and Wilmore.
Absolutely, and to all of our viewers, we wish you a Merry Christmas. That's going to do it for us today on Rising. Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa,
Happy
Diwali,
New Year,
all of the holidays.
5.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.